if truth is just part of the construct of the language, then the language has no construct. Construct itself doesn't have a meaning. Whatever you say to me doesn't make any sense. And all the random molecular interactions in your brain are just simply meaningless. So what are you trying to say?
About 20 years ago, you wrote a book that I'm hoping to get a copy of.
Me too.
If you could find it. Let me see here. The Self-Evident Proof, is that the title?
Correct.
By Richard
Kouchoo?
Yes. Now, I mentioned this earlier, and you said, well, it's not really relevant anymore. Why would you say that?
Well, look, 20 years ago is a long time ago now. What I started on doing 20 years ago was I essentially wanted to write something that you could use to explain the craziness of the relativist kind of thinking that was becoming more and more prevalent in the 1990s. I mean, this thing started really way back, 1940s, 1930s. But then in the 1980s and the 1990s, that was sort of when I was growing up. And by the 1990s, I was, well into my 20s. It was well established. So essentially, what I thought that we could do was to basically teach the younger generation, especially, that this whole thing was self-contradictory. It didn't work. It was meaningless. It was absolutely preposterous when it was really compared to basic logic.
Right.
And that's why I wrote that book. And I thought that I was going to maybe try to publish it to younger audiences, as I said, because, and it was a beginner's book. It was a beginner's book about relativism. It's certainly not an advanced book on modernism and postmodernism and relativism.
Right.
It was a beginner's book. And so I thought that this was going to be something that we could use to maybe educate people about what morality really is about. Because at the end of the day, this thing was about morality.
Well,
and so...
well, the thing is, I'm glad it's simple, because we're arguing on Facebook. It's not... The problem with arguing on Facebook these kinds of issues is you only have little text blurbs to throw out there. It's very hard to lay foundations and get people to see contradiction on these little text blurbs. And
absolutely.
I didn't have any hope that I was actually going to get anywhere with Ken. I was hoping that maybe other people watching would get something out of it, which is usually my mode of operation when I argue with people. I tend to be arguing for the peanut gallery.
Yeah. And I mean, look, go on.
No, go ahead. You were going to say.
No, I was just going to say, God bless Ken and people like him. There are many of them. We can't really, that's why I've sort of changed my mind about that book to some extent. Because what I see now is that, in the words of somebody who did some studies about this sort of thing, his name was Yuri Bezmenov.
Russian?
Yeah, Russian guy, ex-KGB, I'm told.
Okay.
When you're reading about his biography, he talks about demoralization a lot.
Oh, I think I saw it. It's like a video of him being interviewed about...
There's video. He's got books. There's a couple of books around about him, and he's got videos on YouTube. I think they're still up that you can have a look at.
Yeah, I remember.
He's very good.
I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process, which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
Basically, talking about that, even at that late stage, he was saying that there's a process which has been underway in the West, which is called the process of demoralization.
Demoralized, right?
Yeah, the process of demoralization. I mean, I've come across this in the last few years, so that really made sense to me. That's why it didn't make sense to me that we could talk to these people about the illogical way that they go on about morality, and yet they don't understand it. Well, Yuri Bezmenov, for one, explains that these people are really demoralized because of their training and their
Right.
education and
Right.
what they've been taught at universities and schools. And so once you have a demoralized generation or two, you can't really bring them back from the brink. You cannot talk truth to them, and they cannot understand it. So that's why I don't criticize my own book. But what I'm saying about it is that because now we have gone past almost the demoralization stage, nobody's going to sit down and listen to the fact that, hey, when I'm talking, it imbues meaning. If there's meaning, then there's truth. If there's truth, then there's logic, law, God, lawgiver, and things like that. Well, a lot of people, people like E. Michael Jones as well talk about things like logos. The problem that we have right now is that people are demoralized. You cannot talk to them in a sense where they can understand logically, because they just don't have the moral certitude to do it.
Well, let's unpack that word demoralized. Well, first off, and you brought up the education and I guess it's just education mostly, but let's not forget the bombardment of technology, computers, the inputs, everything that all that stuff also has a way of demoralizing, disconnecting. So the moral law is supposed to be an objective law, and this is what our argument with Kenneth was back and forth. And I went even as far to grant him his premise that the Abrahamic God was a wicked God, and okay, fine, let's take that off the table. Let's take that and the Bible off the table. And you brought this up when you first came in, and you only had a few bursts with him, but he's talking about a moral thing that is offending him, and he's expecting that you and I should see it as well. Yeah. And that's the norm. That's normal human morality, in the sense that we all. I remember reading a book where somebody said, if you got on an elevator and a total stranger was in there and slapped you across the face for absolutely no reason, it wouldn't matter what your religious upbringing was. It wouldn't matter what part of the world you lived in. You would feel offended, and you would expect that the person who slapped you should know why you just don't slap people for no reason at all. So there's a sense of justice baked into the human mind already. Now, I guess what you're saying is what demoralization does is disconnects that part of our brain to our mind, I guess, from
Correct.
Our mind.
I mean, it also turns morality upside down. So things that are previously known to be immoral, based on feelings, become moral after a while. So basically, that's a process of demoralization, and it's an education of an entire generation. That's how Yuri Bezmenov talks about it. An education of an entire generation in the structures and ideology of Marxism.
Right.
And that's the.
And well, so what Marxism does is it takes. We all know that a human being is beast and soul, beast and spiritual being. The Marxists say, no, we're just beast. And an
Correct.
emotion is our beast part, a number of the beast, maybe even that's what the Bible's talking about. The beast part of us is our emotions, our feelings, getting high, being depressed, all those physical things. And logic, like Captain Spock in Star Trek, is not emotional. It's true or it isn't true. And if it's true, we want to embrace true. And if it's not true, we have to find out either how to make it true or, jettison it or avoid it. So like
Correct.
what you're saying is our emotions now, we've become bestial, not bestiality. Humanity has become bestial and more violent, more perverse. Like you say, upside down. If it doesn't make you feel good, you don't want to do it. Does that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we've seen as a result of all this, I mean, when you talk to people like that friend of ours, when we were debating with him, and I don't engage in debates with people for too long, because I know most of them will not change their position because they're invested in it, and also
Right.
they cannot see the contradiction in their own words. Like when they say, "Oh, that's your God is a wicked God." Well,
Right.
why?
Okay.
Why is he a wicked God?
Based
You
on what?
answer me that.
Based on
Why?
what?
Because he killed a bunch of Egyptians during the time of Moses. Well, why is that
Slavery.
bad exactly?
Slavery. His big
Or
thing, for
slavery.
some
Why is
reason,
that
he
bad
was like,
exactly?
yeah, he was totally hung on slavery. And I even showed him that, well, the definition of slaves to the Hebrews in the Bible is not the 21st century idea of American 18th century, 1800, racist chattel slavery. It was like what we would call a bond servant, or I have a mortgage on my house. I'm sort of a slave of the
We have
bank.
to pay. Yeah,
And
yeah, and
he didn't
and
want to
so
see it. He wouldn't see that. He said, no, that's not what I mean by slavery. And I go, well, we got to get to terms or we'll never understand it. But to get the main point I wanted to bring out about that was I brought up a abortion, and he defended a woman's right to have an abortion. But he couldn't see the contradiction in a like having a slave, a human owning another person is completely off the table, immoral. No way, you can't, there's nothing good about it, right? But a person killing another person in the womb, the woman, he refused to answer it. He wouldn't even breach the subject. He kept accusing me of trying to change the subject. But
yeah,
so abortion's a
that's
really big one.
that's not atypical of these kinds of people. That's what they do, and they just can't see it. Unfortunately, for their own good, they can't see it. Their Marxist education has taught them to label things as well. That's why they can get away, for example, with talking about abortion quite
Words.
in a different respect to slavery, because they relabel the human being inside the womb. And so when you relabel something and make it an animal or make it something which is not human, then you can do whatever you want in relation to that being. That's what they do. That's how they deal with various problems. They relabel things. They're very good at it. And they've learned it off their Marxist professors from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And all of this really has trickled down through the whole culture, whole society. And quite beside, I mean, people go back to history and say, well, slavery wasn't like it is now, or it was different, or it's just like having a mortgage to the bank now and being a slave to paying interest and all that sort of stuff. Quite beside that, the issue really is at the end of the day that they cannot accept that you have a system of moral logic which every human being is subject to. And
Like it
I
or not.
think, absolutely. And
Right.
one of the main reasons, I think, that's my own thought, one of the main reasons that they can't accept it is really comes down to their own immorality, something that E. Michael Jones talks about, and he
Their own
articulates
personal
it.
sin.
Well,
Right. And their ego.
that's right. Because of their own immorality, they don't want to accept what is true. And so this new Marxist,
Oh yeah, right. He specifically speaks to the LGBTQ ABC groups. You're right, because that specific kind of immorality makes it near impossible to have rational. I think he puts it to have rational logos or rational morality.
it could be any kind of immorality. It could be, you know,
You don't find that
doesn't
one to
have
be more pernicious
that.
than any other?
It can be any kind of immorality, especially and it's more pernicious, yeah, and especially anything that's sex related,
Right.
seems to have that power.
Beast.
Now, yeah, I mean the thing is,
If
look,
anybody's
if
ever
you
had a
don't-
dog who's their best friend dog, and there's a female dog in heat, that dog turns on you, even if he's been your best friend your whole life. And my point is that sex is a very strong driver, and if
Yeah.
all you are is beast and no soul or morality, then that sex will drive you stronger than any of the other beast emotions. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It just
And
popped in
so,
my head.
well, what happened was that's why sex became so prevalent in the 60s, and that's why we have a sexual revolution, because the professors, the academics, and the controllers knew that if they
Pornography
make
controls.
that, yeah, well, I mean, if they make that prevalent, then what they can do is they can demoralize people much more easily.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jones talks about it, although not in that exact sense, but he talks about the sexual revolution leading to
Libido
libido
dominandi, he calls it.
Yeah. So basically, it blinds you when you're in that situation, when you're demoralized to that extent. It blinds you to the truth. It blinds you to the fact that there is a moral lawgiver, and everything turns out to be, oh, that's just your opinion. But wait a minute, that is just your opinion too. So at the end of the day, what they don't think about is that reality, truth, really is the opinion of the supreme lawgiver, God. We're all talking about opinions. At the end of the day, it matters only what God's opinion is. It doesn't matter what my opinion is or what your opinion is. Truth is intrinsically related to the opinion that God has about all of us. And so we have, as a result of all of this demoralization that we've experienced, we are experiencing destabilization in the West currently, and we really are at a stage of crisis. We have destabilization in economics. I mean, countries are printing so much money out of thin air, which they don't have, and which will collapse the system. There's no question about it. We have destabilization now in terms of our internal governmental structures. We have destabilization now. I mean, just look at the demonstrations in the United States.
Well, these are all fruits of being demoralized, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So these are actually fruits and not the actual problem. But everybody goes after the problem of the economics and the problem of racism or whatever the new thing is. But the real problem is we can't agree on what's good or evil anymore.
That's right. We can't agree. And so once you have a society and a community and a culture that goes to the chambers of a council or your local government chambers and prays to Lucifer and Satan, then you know that destabilization is well upon us, and we're at a stage of crisis as well. Demoralization did its work. Destabilization is there. So we're at a stage of crisis. And that's what you see with these American elections. I mean, each side is about to pounce on the other. And especially people like BLM now, they're out there causing all these riots. It's not an accident that this is happening. I mean, 20 or 30 years ago, this sort of thing was unthinkable. It would be unthinkable to say that there'll be a destabilization of Marxist revolutionaries in the streets of the United States in 2020. I mean,
or that everybody would be walking around with face diapers on, even all the way up into the President of the United States. And it would be considered, okay, yeah, let's all walk around with masks on now. Just like that, in months. But the thing is, I want to have this, I want to try and refocus the discussion, because those are all fruits. Those are all, what do you call it, reactions, but those are not the core problem. Those are just the, what's the word when you have a disease? Symptoms. They're symptoms of the bigger problem. And I can go back to this discussion with Kenneth, because there was 2 posts he put that he came right out and made my point, and he didn't know it, and I'm not boasting that it was my point, but I made a point earlier that, well, let me read this. Okay, so I said something, the fact that God allows free will is proof that he opposes slavery. That's just a logical point. But he says, and this is not about how he responds, but how he ends this sentence. He comes right out and says it. If your God is and does as you say, then I consider your God immoral. Okay, fine. All this is based on my reasoning, because I am God. He says it right here. That one slipped by me, because I am God. And I have a point on that. And then he also goes, he says, my reality tells me I have free will. Because I asked him about free will. He says, well, my reality tells me I have free will. So these are the 2 things, my reality and I am God. Now, I made the point in this discussion, and to simplify our whole discussion right now, and let me know if you're running out of time, make sure.
No, that's fine. I'll tell you.
To simplify this conversation, isn't, Richard, there are only 2 kinds of people in the world? Those who recognize a lawgiver, and those who think themselves the lawgiver. And there's no gray area in between.
Well, absolutely. And it doesn't matter how many times you say that you're not a believer, or you don't care about religion, and you don't care about these things. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you're on your own God. If you say those things, and if you do those things, you make the decisions that you make because you are on the seat of your own empire, if you will. That's what most people are. And so, for example, before that fellow said this thing.
It's a solipsism. I don't know how you say it. Solipsism?
Syllogism, you're talking
no,
about?
No, not syllogism. Solipsism, which believes that there's nothing that exists outside of my perception world. Nothing exists out here. That it's like the Matrix.
I mean, it is I think you're trying to say that it's a logical fallacy. It is a logical fallacy. I mean, you can just simply, it doesn't.
No, I'm trying to say that these people literally live in this bubble box that they walk around and bump into each other and interact, thinking that everything that comes into my eyes and my ears and my mouth and my sex organs or whatever, that's the reality that matters. And I can fashion that, and I can judge you or not judge you based on my bubble world.
Yeah. And look, that kind of thinking, which is absolutely wrong, but it permeates the culture. I mean, just 5 years ago, Justice Anthony Kennedy, in a decision called Obergefell, basically said the same thing. I think he said that something to the effect, I think it was Obergefell. He said something to the effect of, whatever people want to do, it's up to them, because that's their universe that they're concerned about. It's their feelings. It's the way that they discover life is the most important thing.
That's just
and
crazy.
So this has gone into the highest court in the United States now. It's the law of the land, if you like. I mean, the law of the land is that
this is the gender ruling. This is the idea that if a person wants to identify, you have to accept their identification as a woman if they're a man, and man if they're a woman, or cat if they think they're a cat. That's it. They're a cat.
It's more fundamental than that, because what we're saying is that our society as a whole in the Western culture has adopted, really, I can't put it any any more softly than this. They have adopted Satanism.
Yes.
Because Luciferianism, Satanism says that the law that is in your eyes is the law that you follow. The law that you want to follow
I
is
am the
whatever
light,
you.
said Satan. I am the light. I am the light
Yeah.
bearer. Mm-hmm.
And one of his high
Well,
priests in
Bishop Sheen, I don't mean to cut you off because that was a point I heard on a speech from Bishop Sheen from the 50s or whatever. But he brought up there's Lucifer and then there's Satan, right? And they are the same thing theologically, but what he wants to say is there's two different personality types with these two different.
Yeah.
So Lucifer is what we were saying with the I am the light, I decide what's right and wrong, I think. Satan is about destruction and chaos, and up is down and down is up. And these are the two forces that are combined right now, is what Bishop Sheen said back in the 50s. He was talking about this, you know. So you can imagine now he would probably have a heart attack just walking down the street. But go ahead. So it's Lucifer, is what you're saying. Luciferian.
If you have a look at people like Anton Levy, who was a high priest of the destructive kind of Satanism, he said that the whole of the law should be do what thou wilt.
Right.
Whatever you want to do, do it. That's the law. So basically, that's what Ken and people like him, there are millions upon millions and millions of them. That's what they are doing at the end of the day. They are doing what they want to do. But also, that is itself contradictory because I usually use the example of the medication. So, for example, they say things like, there's no truth, my truth is all that counts. When it comes to morality, they're very happy with doing that. But if they go to a doctor and the doctor prescribes them with antibiotics because they've got a disease and it's going to kill them if they don't take the antibiotics, they will take the antibiotics. They're not going to argue with the doctor and say, well, that's your truth. You know, I'm not going to accept your truth. I'm not going to take this medication if it's going to even cure me because I don't believe it. These are the same people that don't have any qualms about moving away from morality, but accepting everything else that is good, which comes from it. And
well, they are certainly not consistent in their thinking at all.
Absolutely.
A true atheist doesn't really even exist in my. I can make this argument that there's no such really a true atheist does not exist, because in the end of the day, they still have some kind of moral code, even if it's the moral code do what I want. So that's my moral code. It's still a code, and you expect me to live by your code. So you're not being consistent. There's still some, there's still something in there.
Absolutely. And they are inconsistent because, for example, if you're talking to them about the truth, they say that they don't accept that there's such a thing as truth. Well,
self-contradictory.
Then that is your fundamental truth, isn't it? That is your fundamental truth, that you do not accept anything that is true.
There's no such thing as objective truth. There's no such thing as absolute truth. So you ask them, are you absolutely sure?
Yeah.
They're like,
it's very simple. And that's where this book went to. This book was talking about that all those years ago. And it was basically, it had conversationals where people were talking to each other, and somebody would say, there's no truth. And the other guy would say, are you absolutely sure? It's the same thing that you did.
Yeah,
so is that true or false? And so,
but it doesn't matter. See, Richard, it doesn't matter if they're inconsistent or it's self-refuting, because in their universe, in their little bubble world, it still works for them. I don't care. This is why the conservatives in America lose all the time to the leftists, because the conservatives in America are always trying to they're trying to box by Kingsbury rules all the time. They're always debating these people, expecting that the leftist will follow the rules. And when they get shot below the belt and they get stabbed in the back and they're like, dude, what happened? They don't realize that these people don't play by rules. They play by power or whatever wins, whatever makes them feel good, like you said. And so what you're seeing in America is just the absolute fireworks show of relativism going on. And I did with being a little closer to it here, I would say there is good versus evil going on here.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a worrying situation as well because you have so many people that are demoralized now, and because you are in a time of crisis in terms of systematic power in the government, in terms of foreign relations, in terms of your defense systems. Basically, this is going to be this. I don't see a way out of it, except that we might have, unfortunately, some kind of a confrontation between the two forces, and that's what it seems to me to be like, especially with these elections coming up. I mean, if Trump wins, and everybody's saying he's going to lose, everybody in the mainstream media, they're saying that he's going to
not
lose.
anymore.
I'd be very surprised if he loses.
Yeah.
But let's say he wins, it's just going to be an unbelievable amount of demonstration out there, especially because we've seen what these people do. I mean, yesterday I was watching on the news, this guy was eating a heart outside somewhere in some demonstration. I don't know what for. It was symbolizing some rubbish or rather. So it's really hard to talk to these demoralized people. It's really hard to talk to them in logical terms. That's why you have places like Spain where people moved into a situation of, well, they call it fascism, but I mean, somebody will come into power to control
the strong man,
and normalize things,
yeah,
and that is absolutely needed. Either you'll have somebody from the left who will control and normalize things at the end of the day, and basically make it illegal for you to say things like, "Oh, that's just your opinion," or somebody from the right will do that. But there's no other way. You cannot speak to these people. You cannot teach them.
No. At a certain point, it's going to have to come down to crushing, maybe even absolutely violence. And this is sort of goes back to the point where God was not being immoral to Sodom and Gomorrah. He was not being immoral to the Canaanites. He is the lawgiver, and these people are not going to listen anymore. There was a certain point, the reason the Jews, this was an interesting point, some guy studying the Bible brought up. I don't know if it's theological, but it's an interesting point. And the point was that he said that the Jews wandered about for 40 years because God couldn't give them the land of Canaan because Canaan, the Canaanites, hadn't gone far enough yet to be wicked enough to be eliminated. Not that God wanted that to happen, but at a certain point, if we remember our story, that it was either, I don't know if it was Noah or Moses. Was it Moses who argued for Sodom and Gomorrah, or Abraham for Lot?
We're
anyway,
talking about Abraham and Lot.
Abraham, right? Okay, so I got confused there. So I believe Abraham argues with God, Lord, will you spare the city if there's 50 just men? Yes, if there's 50, and so on. And he goes down to almost one. Yeah. So the point is that at a certain point, even the most merciful of gods says there's no turning back. You people are rotted through and through. We have to do a reset. And that includes violence, I would imagine. Now, that's sort of why I hope Trump wins, because at least the violence will be in the hands of the semi-good people. I'm not saying that he's perfect, don't get me wrong. But if you put that violence in the hands of Biden-Harris, it's going to be death camps. It's going to be China putting their troops in our country because they are bought and paid for by China. So, it is lesser two evils. Nobody likes the phrase lesser two evils. But if you give me a boat with a crazy captain, but the boat is sound, I'll take the crazy captain and the sound boat. But if you give me a crazy captain and a boat with holes in it, I don't want to go there. So I was hoping not to go to politics, but it's still, I think America is becoming the showplace of demoralization. What happens to a great country that allows itself through luxury, through sin, through pornography, and all the things that demoralized us. What happens to us? Look at us. We're not unified in any. We're balkanized completely.
Yeah, and that's like I say, that's a main worry. And I was talking about Spain and Franco.
Yeah, Franco.
Essentially,
That's right. Right. He's a strong man.
you see that all throughout history. You see that all throughout history because you have a period of demoralization, then you have a destabilization, then you have a crisis, then somebody comes in and normalizes it. And as you say,
Well,
unfortunately,
Napoleon normalized the French Revolution. Napoleon
that's
had to
right.
come
It
in because
happens
it was
all the time. It happens all the time. It's not a
Hitler.
new thing. The only problem that we have now is that we have a very sensitive geopolitical environment as well for everybody. So it's a especially dangerous time. I personally think that we might have some kind of a major war in the not too distant future, because this demoralization is just not contained in one place. It's not just in
No, it's
America.
global. I mean, people around the world are wearing masks. People around the world
It's a
are.
very global thing. Don't worry about masks. I mean, see what
Well,
happened yesterday.
the
See what
mask
happened
to
yesterday.
me, Richard, is like a complete symbol of a person's willingness to eject logic and reason and follow blindly. And that's why I keep bringing up the masks. The masks are a symbol of the number of the beast. They are saying that I don't care what the science says. I'm going to listen to my leadership, and I don't care if I'm uncomfortable. I don't care if I can't see people anymore. I don't care if my business goes under. I'm going to wear this mask. And also, as a Catholic, I understand that every face of I have a theology of the face based on Jesus Christ's face, because every face is the face of Christ if you have faith. So if you cover that face up, I know maybe I'm going off the deep end with you on that, but I'm saying you can't dismiss the mask. The mask isn't just a non-thing. It's a symbol of something very deep and wrong. I mean, that people are willing to do it, I should say.
You know what it is? It's about a reset. I don't think there's going to be too much controversy in saying that, because people from the World Economic Forum have been saying that as well. They're saying that this situation that we have now is a good opportunity for a reset, and so all those things that come along with it, mask is one of them. People read into it a bit. They say that it's a symbol of slavery. I suppose that could be true, but
That's
don't
what I'm
forget
saying.
that,
That's what I'm saying.
don't forget that unfortunately in the West, we just tend to look at the Western side of things. The reset and the idea about the reset is a Western idea. It is not followed by various Eastern nations. China is not on board, Russia is not on board, places like Iran, Venezuela, they're not on board. And these people are not insignificant. So this idea that we're going to have a reset and everybody's going to have, all over the world, they're going to have to take a vaccine with a chip inside it. I think it's far-fetched at the moment anyway, because seriously, there are resistant countries to this idea. It's a Western idea, and I think
even Trump
probably
recently said that he was not going to force the vaccine because there's people with very strong opinions on it. So
yeah. So
but
I think it's just this idea about this pandemic causing this reset. I think what they say: don't let a good opportunity go to waste.
Right, good crisis
This
go to waste.
blow back. This is going to blow back as well. They could have used it, for example, to oust Trump, or they could have used it for other things to get rid of the current problems, systematic problems in the financial system. And there are lots of them. But it doesn't seem to have worked over the last 8 months. Things haven't gone to where they were talking about it. And people, including myself, I thought at first this was really a big deal, but now I've changed my mind about it, and I can see
What's not
that
a big
there's
deal?
no cooperation no cooperation at all going on an international level.
What's not a big deal? You thought it was a big deal, but now you don't think so. What are we talking about? The pandemic?
I thought that they were going to use the pandemic in order to sort of set up a kind of a global governance system.
Okay.
But it doesn't seem to have
It
worked.
fizzled out.
It fizzled out because people like China and Russia are not on board. They're not accepting it. And
well,
so,
to be fair, there's a shit ton of Americans who aren't on board either. You may not hear it in your press out there, but Trump is not our God King. Trump is our symbol for us not being on board with the reset as well. That's why his numbers are like climbing through the roof right now.
Yeah.
So,
and
secretly, the press won't tell you, but that we know because we're seeing them. If Trump shows up at an airport, there's 10,000 people showing up, maskless, half of them. If Biden has a thing, there's like 6 people if he's lucky. So my point is that maybe Michael Jones has a point that Logos is rising, and in trying to steer it back to our original discussion, I think the solution is, first off, the solution is God. I think it will be clarifying if a third world war breaks out, starting out in Turkey and Greece, and involving us in some horrific way, unfortunately. It has a way of clarifying the mind. And I don't know, is remoralizing a word? Maybe it will remoralize a lot of people.
It's a reset. It's the true reset.
A good reset. Yeah, right. A good reset. I think we do need a reset. I mean, if the word reset is used as a cliche term for the banksters and the economic system and the number of the beast and all that shit, yeah, nobody wants that. But we do need a reset. And nothing will reset people more than horrific suffering.
Yeah, and it's tended to do that during the First World War, Second World War. They were basically resets, and people were remoralized until in the 1960s. We've had a very long period of peace, and it's been not absolute peace, but relative peace. It's been a very long period since 1945, 75 years. There have been wars here and there. We had Vietnam, we had some other wars, but they're not a very all-encompassing war that basically made the whole earth suffer. Right. But I think that every century we have a war, a very large war, at least one. So this century is not going to be an exception. We're going to have one. And so it depends on, it's just a matter of when. And so when it happens, there's going to be the reset. I mean, people at the World Economic Forum can talk about a reset all they want. They're going to get one. And it's going to be through the means of interaction of the world militaries at some point. And yes, you mentioned Turkey and Greece. That power-hungry madman in Turkey seems to be the prime suspect, if you like, for starting something like this. He's been involved everywhere, in Syria and Libya, and now in Greece. He's now in also Armenia, doing all sorts of things. So somebody's going to light a powder keg, and when it's lit, people will then maybe almost immediately moralize. You will see that. I mean,
yeah, well, you're going to be faced with life or death. It's no more this luxury. Yeah. The luxury, relativism is a luxury item.
It is a luxury. And so when people realize, oh no, we're going to have to send our army now to, because there's a war between, let's say, for argument's sake, there's a war between Russia and Turkey on, and we're going to have to sort of do something about preserving our access to the Mediterranean, to the straits in and around Turkey. We need to go to war with Russia.
Right.
So everybody's going to freeze at that moment and realize that something big is about to happen. You see that. Right. Historic people. I mean, just after 9/11, everybody sort of got a little bit more moralized. I remember that. It was about it came out, actually.
Right.
So,
well, let's talk about that. Let's unpack that a little bit, because we can go on and on about global, infrastructure and the wars that are coming and all. let's talk about why it is that a human being will remoralize in the face of tragedy, death, suffering. Because as Catholics, you and I know, the central part of our faith is about handling suffering and bringing about good from evil, which is the whole message of the crucifixion of our Lord. He suffered horribly, and
Yes.
and those around him who loved him, like Our Lady, suffered along with him. And through the ages, Catholics have suffered, as opposed to all the other religions of the world that speak nirvana and goodness. And, you know, we understand that you're not going to get out of this world without suffering. Like Jim Morrison said, no one here gets out alive. Everybody's going to suffer somewhere, somehow. And the religion of our faith, the Catholic faith, is the only one that really addresses suffering properly and puts it in its proper context, puts it to good use. So the solution to demoralization is unfortunately suffering, I would think.
It is, yeah. You're absolutely right. And that's why there is suffering. I mean, a lot of these so-called atheists, I just call them modernists. Even postmodernism is not the right term.
Right.
These are modernists, really, relativist modernists, who basically deny meaning. A lot of them have a problem with suffering. And because we have a comfortable culture now, they say, oh, there's no God because there's suffering. But when suffering comes home, some of these people actually wake up.
Yeah.
And so they realize that they had it good before. And what they've got to do now is bend the knee and put the head down and pray to the non-existent God so that he can maybe
that's the great argument that the recent famous atheist, what's his name, he just died too, his brother's a conservative, what's his name, I'm sorry, anyway, you know what I mean, we got us both jammed
the gentleman
up.
who died.
Anyway, he was very well spoken and he was very charming and very enigmatic, but he would always bring up, how could you believe in a God, a good God, and there's children with leukemia? You know, it's always childhood leukemia he would bring up. And as a Catholic, I would say, well, a child with leukemia is a child who is going to suffer, but his soul will be better for it. I mean, it's not that I want him to have leukemia, obviously. It's like you say, I think the aversion to suffering is a luxury. We didn't have to deal with it. Like, so back in the Middle Ages, it was every day you had to deal with it. There was not all this technology saving your butt. There was nothing, you know, you were dying, your friends would just die in front of you. I mean, there was no health care. You know, all these things have this tendency to insulate us from suffering and therefore insulate us from our true selves. And then when suffering comes, we're at a loss. And so to remoralize, I guess we're going to have to suffer, proper suffering.
That's right. And so that's, I guess, I'm not a very big critic of technology, but technology does have its part as well to play in relation to
I'm a huge
making.
I'm not a Luddite,
making less prone to believe because of the comforts of this world. And really, people start believing in God when they have suffering. And I think this gentleman that you were mentioning as well, he actually said, I can't remember his name at the moment.
Kenneth. The atheist. Richard Dawkins?
Yeah.
No, not Dawkins.
No, it's not.
It was the other one. It was one of them. He was one of the five horsemen.
Yeah, he was a journalist. And he said once that I think he was suffering from esophageal cancer.
Right, that's how he died, right.
Yeah, and he said that, look, something to the effect of, if during my sufferings I start saying I believe in God, don't believe me. So even he knew that suffering was a very important force. I mean, people criticize suffering all the time, but suffering is very important. It's like a drum beat, somebody said, that essentially brings the message of God to humanity, to let
Well,
people know that there is a
it's
God.
certainly a winnowing fork, as our Lord put it. It's a separating. Jesus said, "Think not that I've come to bring peace, but the sword of division." You know,
That's
he
right.
said it. You know, and one of my other favorite ones is, "In this world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer, because I've overcome the world." So
Amen.
our faith is a solution to demoralization and moral relativism. But when they attack the faith itself, you have to go back to just basic natural law, I guess. And natural law is we all die. And if suffering comes through a war, and nations are obliterated in nuclear holocaust, it's going to be a little hard to say, I identify as a girl, but I'm a guy. Those discussions won't be being had. The discussion will be, where can I find a potato so I can eat today? I mean,
That's
you see
exactly right. That's exactly right. The comforts of this world just disappear, and so survival will be the main game, really, at that point. And so, if that were to come to pass, and it's, as I say, I think it's just a matter of when, not of if. If that were to
Yes.
come to pass, things that we spend our time worrying about now will not be a worry anymore. I mean,
Well, I
who
could say
wants
one thing. Yeah, it's a matter of when, not if. But there is a certain if I hold out, and that is the improbability factor from that book, Hitchhiker's Guide. But there is the if, in that we do believe in a God who's on his throne. And maybe there's a metaphor that Bishop Sheen brought up that I thought was interesting. I don't know if this is true biologically for eagles, but from the understanding what he told, the story was that an eagle will push its baby out of the nest when it thinks it has enough wings to fly, and they're always way up high. And when the eagle pushes the baby out to fly, it flies above him and watches how far it falls. And if it's going to not start flying quick, it grabs it, brings it right back up, lets it go again. And then eventually the baby eagle goes woo and starts flying off. But we're maybe at that point where God is just letting us, but he's still
Yeah.
above us. He still can swoop in. Our Lady promised such a thing. He could swoop in, but obviously I think a couple of eagles are going to have to hit the rocks.
Well, I really can't see, because for that to happen as well, people will have to, as I say, bend their knees and start praying and stop sinning. And, people are digging in even more these days than they used to be. They were just talking about some CNN journalist that did something really awful on a Zoom
Yeah, I
meet.
heard about that. Right.
It's just crazy. I mean, it's reached proportions of madness. And so the demoralization is just not going away by itself. People have to take responsibility. And so this comes back to my issue about my criticism of my own book, which is that you can't really tell this to people and expect them to move and change, because they just don't accept it. You say to them,
Don't touch the
they don't
stove.
accept, they don't accept truth. They say that, oh, that's not true. I don't believe in absolute truth. That's absolutely true. No, that's because that's your opinion that it's absolutely true. My opinion is that it's not absolutely true. Well, it is absolutely true that you have an opinion that says that this is absolutely true. Therefore, absolute truth exists. So basically, you have this kind of a word game with them. It's never going to end. They'll bring up things like, oh, truth is just part of the construct of the language. That's something that
Right.
by the name of Wittgenstein, I think, brought up. And so they'll just play these games, they don't understand that when you say things like that, it means that whatever you say in language is meaningless. If truth is just part of the construct of the language, then the language has no construct. Construct itself doesn't have a meaning. Whatever you say to me doesn't make any sense. And all the random molecular interactions in your brain are just simply meaningless. So what are you trying to say?
Right. You're reaching for
and
something.
they still say, oh, no, you're wrong and I'm right.
However,
so,
when the building collapses right in front of their face, it's a little hard to rationalize that with words. Like in 9/11, a lot of people melted down simply because I'm a New Yorker and I just saw that building every day of my life and it was as solid as a rock and I just watched it collapse in 30 seconds flat. And they were traumatized by that because you can't find any word games to play around that level. And I think this is what we're saying with the suffering and the war that maybe needs to come. Maybe it needs to be a war.
absolutely.
I've been saying that since this started. I think we need a war. I posted that on Facebook several times. I think we need a war. I'm not that I'm for war, but it's like I think we discussed this before, where I say when you have that, you're sick, you're going to throw up in the beginning of the middle of the night. You wake up, you ate something you shouldn't have, and you just know it, but it hasn't happened yet. But you know it, and you're almost longing for it to get it over with because you know it has to come. And until it comes, there'll be no relief.
If words don't change people, his act will.
Yes.
So this pandemic was somehow an act as well of God. I mean, we can't discount that. We can't say that it wasn't.
No,
we can't say
no.
that it was a conspiracy by various factions. Could be just a way to reset the economic system. Yeah, it could be. But also, don't forget that, as E. Michael Jones says, there's such a thing as cunning of reason. God
the
uses
cunning of
whatever.
reason. Mm-hmm.
That's right. God uses whatever people do to his own ends, and so this is, I think, is turning out to be that way. It's starting to fizzle. They're talking about a third wave again, but nobody really is paying attention. And so basically, I think that this is just the beginning of a chastising sort of period, an epoch, and that's a real worry.
All right, Richard. Thank you very much, Richard Kouchoo. I will edit this and post it up, and I'll let Kenneth King know if he wishes to. This is to you, Kenneth King. If you wish to respond to this, I'll be glad to have a Skype discussion with you as well, for fair notice. Right? Give him his fair share. But thanks again, Richard. God bless you over there. You have a good rest of your day. And I'll think of you in my rosary. You do the same for me. I could use it.
I will.
All right, my brother. God bless you. Bye.
Memories